Hello and welcome to the Rask Network. What you're about to hear and see is limited to general financial information only. Please be sure to speak to your financial planner or refer to our financial services guide available at rask.com.au/FSG before acting on the information.
Hello and welcome back to the Australian Finance Podcast. I'm your host, Kate Campbell, and today I'm chatting with Beck Wilson, who is an expert on modern retirement. Her mission is to learn about and share the proven ways you can create a better midlife and a modern epic retirement. This conversation is all about giving you the tools and resources you need to start talking to your parents or maybe even yourself about money and retirement. Beck, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on the show, Kate.
Now, I have to ask, why are you so passionate about retirement? Because it's not something you hear many people say.
I've been in this sector for nearly 15, maybe a bit over 15 years. So when my parents were turning 60, and they're now 75 and 78, I was kind of curious about the internet and how nobody was providing content for them as they came into the internet. And we're thinking, this is right back at the beginning of Facebook, right? This is 2013. And I started a media company back then that was pure digital, that was designed to help them navigate the phase of life, the feelings they were having about this transitional period of life. And over the years, that business grew and it grew into Australia's largest media company for over 60s. And then we grew a massive travel business as well. And 10 years went by, click of a finger, as it does. And I decided, I'd done my 10 years and it was time to step out and do something different and something that could have more impact than the constant churn of media content that just disappears into the ether, right? We know what media content has become, and it's sometimes a little soulless to work in that field where everything's disposable. But what I really felt was that there was a set of instructions for people that they didn't know. So I set about writing a guidebook for this phase of life and see if people really did want to know the modern way to navigate it. And blessedly, with more than 1 million followers over those 10 years, I'd heard almost every story.
Are there any that stand out to you the most about being the difference between what we think about retirement when we visualize the idea and what retirement actually is when you hear from your community that are retiring?
Oh, there's just so many. I mean, and it's the reason I built a framework for this, because for me, the journey people go on here, they think of as idealistic. The cover of my book has a white Adirondack chair and a palm tree and a sunset. And that epitomizes what people think retirement is. But let's be blunt. Retirement is a time when you move from active income to passive income. It's a time when you move from getting your satisfaction from working to deciding what you want to do with your time. You no longer have to work. And I think, people don't realize that. They have really no idea that they still have the choice to work. Even if they're drawing from a passive income source, they still have all these wonderful choices. And maybe it feels like they have to give up all those things that they had fulfillment from earlier in life. What I'd like everybody to understand is that they can mix the life they want to live. And increasingly, even for midlifers, that's becoming more of a possibility now that we have superannuation. So the stories that people tell me are often about the gap between the ideal and the reality, and how it feels and how hard it can be, and also how wonderful it can be if you find your sense of happiness, your sense of self, and your financial certainty at the same time.
I remember when we were chatting off air before that we were talking about that idea that young people have where we can have portfolio careers, we can mix and match part-time work, we can do lots of different work. Doesn't look the same. It doesn't look Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 in an office anymore. And you were mentioning there's a lot that older people can learn from those ideas because there's that concept that you have to just get to 65, 70 and just stop completely, whereas it doesn't have to be that way anymore.
So I think the last generations to catch on to that concept of mix and matching your life to suit you is Gen X and the Boomer. I really think they've run the workplaces, they've built the workplaces we have today. They're the responsible grown-ups in every room, and they haven't learned how to put themselves first again. Their kids are growing up and they're becoming, responsible young adults, and for the first time they get to say, hey, actually, I don't have to be there 5 days a week. I don't have to work 40 hours a week. if they can afford it. And it all comes back to them understanding, because a lot of them fear what happens when they don't have that. They've had it for so long. It provides a level of constant stability. It provides their what they know, right? Young people don't know it, right? The wonderful thing about the younger generations today, and I have 3 children that are coming into their adulthoods now, and honestly is they're almost like young entrepreneurs, all of them, right? And I'm an entrepreneur, so I think outside the box. And my friends often look to me and go, how come you don't want a 5-day-a-week job? And how can you cope with having 5 different income streams? And that would make me feel very insecure, they say to me. And I go, well, in fact, I've sort of made myself comfortable with it because I haven't worked for anyone for 21 years. But other people in my generation are not like that. The gap they feel in their life when they don't have the stability of work, when they don't have a steady paycheck that they can rely on, that the rhythms they've relied on in life disappear. Young people haven't had rhythms yet.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's so important that we start having these conversations with our parents. So I'm in my 20s. Many of my friends are in their 20s and 30s. And a lot of us haven't spoken to our parents about money, whether it's about our own finances or their finances before. Do you think it's important that we start having these conversations? Very leading question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I talk, and I have a wonderful father who's very financially literate and really smart, right? So he's the man who proofs my books and tells me if I've got the tax laws wrong, and all those wonderful things that you need one of those, right? But he taught me financial literacy probably in my 30s, I think, once I showed an interest.
Yeah.
And the key was he was waiting for me to become interested because he knows all about it. On the other hand, I've got other relatives, close family members who aren't very financially literate, who it becomes similarly. You've got to reflect that, older relatives, if you're going to talk to them about money and they're not interested, it can be a very hard conversation. So the key I've always learned is to try and get them interested on their own, so that when they're having the conversation, they're participating. Because I think participation in a financial conversation is the most valuable thing we can have. If you start to twig on to what's going on in your own head and you get interested in compounding, oh my God, don't you want to make compounding happen then, right? But if you're not listening when somebody's lecturing you on how to budget, right? And I lecture my 19-year-old occasionally on her constant stream of online shopping that arrives at the door, right? And if she's not in the mood to listen to Budgeting 101, there's no point.
I can't say at 19 I wanted to hear from my mum about my online shopping, but luckily I've gotten better since then.
And look, my 16-year-old son tells me regularly TikTok's told him he'll never be able to buy a house. And that came out at the dinner table the other night, and we were able to have a really good conversation because he raised it. And TikTok, he fully believed that because of TikTok, he was never going to be able to afford a house. And I think that's a misnomer, that, these conversations with any generation, we need to have them, and my generation needs to have them with our children, so that they know how you go about building a deposit for a mortgage and how you go about creating rhythms that can make paychecks, that can pay mortgages, right? Because in a rhythmless generation, maybe that's harder, is what I'm hearing. And maybe the variability of employment makes that seem really difficult for younger generations. But for older generations, they haven't learned flexibility of income, right? And flexibility of spending, right? They've spent it all on the kids. And so breaking them out of that and into the, you can spend some on yourself. Because, there's a whole lot of different conversations our parents, I think, could be having with themselves about money, that their kids could also be almost giving them a bit of a nudge to look after themselves better, and a bit of a kick along the path of, hey, it's your money. You actually built this up. I would be excited as your child to see you enjoying this phase of your life.
One of the interesting things when talking to parents about money is they can sometimes fall into 2 baskets. They either think they're going to live forever, and so they're going to need to stretch out the money they have as long as possible and can't spend it, or they fall into the basket like, oh, I'll be dead at 70. I'll just spend it. I don't need a plan for retirement. I don't need to worry about it. How do you approach those 2 different buckets of people?
Well, here's a good little tip, because I use this one all the time to talk to people online as well, and people in my community, and that is to understand life expectancy. So the average 65-year-old today in Australia has a life expectancy, let me try and pull the right data for you, of around about 89 for men, I think, and 90 for women. 88 for men and 90 for women. But they have, if they're in a couple, a significant chance of one of them living to 94. Now, that if they're above average health and wealth, they could live longer, quite significantly could live longer. And so the first thing to do is that's the fact. So we can remove emotion from it. And it's best to remove emotion from the longevity discussion and say, okay, so these are the facts. All right, mum and dad, you have two different ways of thinking about this. We do have a problem in our country right now with people not spending their retirement savings. Maybe your parent is in that bucket, maybe they're not, right? And you know, the ones who want to spend for today and not worry about tomorrow, well, there's some really cool things for everybody to talk about more, and that's how the systems will support them later in life, and are they willing to live on an age pension? Because an age pension isn't enough really to live on until the very later stages, and only if you own your own home outright. Otherwise it's a tough life, and you know, everybody should understand that then probably as children they're going to need to help their parents along that journey, to understanding the systems and maybe learning how to leverage their superannuation at the right pace on that journey, because superannuation is a layer that can sit on top of the age pension, and it can make life a little bit more pleasant. You can draw down $10,000 or $15,000 from a small super fund, whatever it's earning each year, for the whole of your life and never eat into the capital, or you can get some financial advice and gradually learn to spend a little bit more than the balance that's coming in through the earnings each year. But for people who aren't used to living on layered income streams, that whole concept, it often doesn't even enter their mind. And they often don't even want to understand it because they're so afraid of the people who are going to rely on the age pension, of the fact that they might be going to live in relative poverty once they leave the workforce, that they don't want to know how tough it might be. And on the other side, you've got the lifestylers. You've got a whole generation of people who've got plenty of money now. And, you know, they get to live on their superannuation income. Maybe they can find a way to get a little bit of age pension and have a reasonable income to live on. And, you know, the lifestyle choices they get to have are actually pretty cool. And you can make your money last in the current economic kind of world where we're spending from the earnings from our super funds. You know, it's a lot easier to understand how passive income works when superannuation takes care of it for you and you're not relying on rental properties to do that anymore, which used to be what we were all taught in our youth was the way to build wealth, right? We don't have to Robert Kiyosaki everything through rental properties anymore, right? We can actually rely on our superannuation and understand pacing to feel more comfortable.
How do we bring these ideas up with our parents? Because you've mentioned they're going to live for quite a lot longer than they probably expect, and that we need to approach these conversations with curiosity and not as a lecture. But are there any maybe prompts or places you'd start when having these conversations?
Well, I like life expectancy. I think it's a really fun way to start the conversation. You can talk about a statistic. You could say, you can blame me. Say you heard me talking about it, right? And you wondered how long they thought they were going to live. Because to me, the conversation also leads to a whole lot of other behavioural stuff. I can talk about it with my dad, and he's quite interested in this conversation. And even my mum, and you say to him, so you're pretty healthy, Dad. You know, he goes to the gym 3 hours a day at 78.
Whoa.
Yeah, exactly. Right?
He's found his hobby.
He's found his hobby. He finds the idea of living in good health a better idea in his mind than living in poor health.
Yeah.
And so for him, that's one of his missions. So we have a conversation about, okay, what does life look like in the years ahead? And he's got a picture he's working towards. And one of them then plugs exercise into it. He's got enough money and he knows how his money's going to work. We don't discuss a lot about money because he's very comfortable with his money. But he also is very comfortable with the fact that he's got to look after his body. So the life expectancy discussion doesn't just open up, I want to talk about your money conversation. It's quite a lot lighter. It's like, what does life look like? Have you even thought about where you're going to live when you're 80? Right? And because it opens up, it actually opens the 6 pillars of an epic retirement. It's the first pillar for a reason, because if you think about life expectancy, you then want to plan all the other things. And it becomes quite a light way to get everybody going, wow, yeah, my life could be long. And if I want it to be long, I've got to make sure it's good quality, because none of us want to spend well, let's talk about that. Health spans are actually something that are really important parts of a life expectancy discussion. We spent, as a woman, 13% of our life in poor health, most of it at the end of life. As a man, we spend 12% of our life in poor health, which means most women will actually live longer than their men if they're married, which means we then also have to open the discussion of, do you realize you'll probably be alone later in life? And if you were to actually plan for that rather than just let it happen to you, how would you like your life to look? Right? You want to be living down the road from your children? Excellent. I think that's great. Right? You want to be living amongst a community by then. And they're not things people in their 50s and 60s love discussing. So you've got to
No.
make it fun. Right? Life expectancy makes it fun. It's not a morbid discussion. And then you deal in the ideals. It's easier to deal in the ideals of midlife. What do you want the good bits to look like?
Yeah. And think of it proactively.
Yeah. And then, okay, once we've talked about the good bits, we can get to the tough bits and think, do we have a thought about that? Because the thoughts will build over time. And the good thing is you don't have to have them all at once and you don't have to discuss them all at once. If you plant seeds, they grow trees. And if you plant a seed for your parents to think about their life expectancy and all the different things that might mean and how they could then be thinking about that in their picture of their life and how they choose to live it better, then maybe in a year's time they've grown a bit more of a tree of the plan and the vision they have, and maybe that'll inspire them to get financial advice, because once they know what their goals are, they go, well, how do I get to those goals, right? And I like all the whole process of vision setting and vision building without calling it that, because I think the minute we make it strategic, nobody wants to do it.
I was talking to my parents about reflecting and journaling this year.
No,
they didn't want a bar of it.
It's not a generational thing. Look, there might be people who out there who really, really take it seriously, but I think when you're heading Gen X and Boomers, that is we didn't have mindfulness.
Yeah,
we grew up in a time, and I saw this somewhere on the internet recently. We didn't need mindfulness. We grew up in a time when we played in the trees. Yeah. Right, when we went to the park, we didn't need to calculate a moment into our life to consider that, right?
Didn't need an app to take time off the other apps.
No, so mindfulness is a concept that's appeared, I think, since we lost all that space in our life. And, you know, people who feel like they're missing that go looking for it with journaling, and other people just write diaries. And they still write it. They just use different language to discuss the way they keep a journal or a process, and they do it for different reasons. They might not write a gratitude journal. They might just keep a few notes about what they did, you know, and it's for everybody to have their own way of thinking about life. But this generation's living it, actually, rather than writing about it, which I love.
If we think about retirement and reverse engineer it, what might stop our parents from having an epic retirement?
I think everybody can have an epic retirement so long as they become invested in the idea of it. You don't have to have a lot of money to have an epic retirement. It's choice making. It's, do I choose to get up and go and do things and be proactive about things? And you know, I'll walk you through the 6 pillars in a minute, but you know, it's a really proactive way. So if you're not proactive, that's what stops you having an epic retirement. If you live your life waiting for someone else to tell you, waiting for the community to come to you and pull you out of your armchair, waiting for the hobbies to find you, you don't have an epic retirement, right? If you live waiting for financial decisions to be made for you, you know, sadly, that's what kills the idea of an epic retirement. And that's why I'm so passionate about spreading the idea that this is self-help. This is a generation and a time of life that no one else is going to do it for you. Your employer's not going to drag you down the runway to having a good life. Your kids aren't even going to do it, right? You've got to get up and go find one. I mean, there's horrible things happen in this phase of life as well. Harder things than we ever have to deal with. We lose partners, we lose friends, we lose jobs, we you know, lots and lots of, you know, we lose money. All sorts of things happen that, you know, magically don't happen as often in early stages of life. And even then you have to be proactive about dusting yourself off, getting back up, going through a transition, managing your mental health, your physical health, your financial health to come out the other side and get back on the bus of life. And, Yeah, it's shitty to say that, but people kind of need that little hug to get up and look after themselves, I think.
Can we talk about some of those pillars of an epic retirement? Because I think they might be good conversation starters for listeners with their...
Yeah, absolutely. Look, there's 6 pillars, and even 18 months on from writing the book, I have no desire to put a 7th in, which is a good feeling.
Standing the test of time. So,
and I've just written another book. I finished it last week, and it's for 50-year-olds today. So 50 to 65-year-olds, not necessarily the retirement generation, because the next generation coming behind doesn't necessarily see retirement the same way as the person who can see retirement today. And so I figured they needed a different story. But the 6 pillars of an epic retirement, when you can see one of those in your life, starts with understanding time. How long could you have, and how do you want to use that time, right? And if you think about the ways you want to break down your life into active phases, and then when is your health likely to fall away a bit? And you can have some reasonable views on that, being, 12 or 13% of life is spent in that poor health. So that probably means the last 10 years of your life won't be perfect. They won't all be awful, but they just won't be as healthy and fit as when you go in. So that gives you some guide on where to lead yourself, right? And the last 2 years of life could suck. We call that frailty. So then you think about all the different stages of life that you'll go through, and you start to map out your goals for those. Then you move into financial confidence, because it's one thing to have money. And I do call the section money, but I think if I was revising the book now, I'd change it to financial confidence, because you need to learn how to be confident with what money you have access to, no matter how much money you have access to. Because once you move into this phase, there's kind of no going back. You live on a combination of passive and still active incomes. If you want to keep working, you can keep working in retirement. That's something people don't often realize, that probably about 80% of people still work after they technically retire. And then there's like 10 systems to learn about and 10 things to learn about in building your financial confidence. And they're all quite detailed, intricate things that we probably have never had to really understand in life before now, or many people haven't. Some people have been really proactive about investing from very early in life. But a lot of people have got by on, the super funds doing the investing for them, and, paying off a house. And some of that stuff can then be, okay, I've got to understand this stuff, because the decisions you make with your money at this phase of life are often decisions you've never made before, and you'll probably never have to make again. So if you make them wrong, it's really bad.
Yeah.
And so you really want to help people understand what a good decision is. And you can't, I'm not a finfluencer. I won't tell them what products to buy and how to do it. I'll just explain the systems and the way they work and the way different products work to help them. And then they have to go do their own research. Then we move into health. And to be honest, I think health is actually more important than all of them once you get to the epic retirement. So you've got to do some work before you get there. And it's a little like doing financial work on the last day before you retire. It's like, could be a little late. Yep. So, think about your health and how you want your body to work in this phase of your life. And what are you going to do so that when you get there, you really get to enjoy it and you're strong and you're healthy. And think about what future you wants you to do with your body and your mind and your health, your nutritional health. There's 2 really big parts to this. The science of modern aging tells us how we can slow down the chronic diseases that are causing the big disease called aging. So I teach everybody about the science of modern aging and what they can watch and learn about. It's pretty cool, fun stuff, because it's really on the cutting edge. Because they're reversing aging in America and the UK right now just by working out how cells work as we get older. And there's actually things that we can all do in our everyday life to stop our cells really getting to the ugly, messy bit, or slow down that process. It's quite complex, so I won't go into it.
I'm sure you talk about it on your podcast too.
I do. And then you have the things we can do to prevent poor health. So there's a whole lot of preventive tests and stuff, and I dive in there. Then we move into happiness and fulfillment, because really, why do we want to be retired? Most people are chasing a level of happiness that they're not getting from the workplace, right? They've might be feeling a little bit of inner death as they get towards the end of their career and feeling like there must be something next. Other people are just dumped into retirement by the working environment that's still pretty ageist and doesn't necessarily do right by people as they get older, and they head off into retirement and try to figure out who they are. Well, explaining the process of how happiness is created scientifically so that they can go and get some, even if it's short-term hits, while they build longer-term happiness and fulfillment, is a big part of what I write about, so that they can understand the journey from that vacant feeling when you give something up. Because everybody gets that, right? Or a lot of people get it, unless they've done work beforehand to kind of give them something that's going to help them ride over the wave of change. And I talk about transitions and the process of transitioning. And then you get to travel. Now, I ran a travel business for 6 years. I don't know an Australian in retirement that doesn't want to travel. There's a few, but not very many. So I think it's really cool to be able to teach people how they can have 3 holidays a year for the price of 2.
Ooh.
So that's what I do in that section. And explain the detailed insights into how the travel industry works so that they can, play through and understand how to get good deals if that's a priority, or good value for money if they're at the premium end, because there's also premium experiences to understand and all of that. And then the last one is the hardest topic to address, but it's also one people are really, really curious about. And that is your home as you age. And for everybody, this is an important discussion. And if you've got parents, this is a really important discussion, because if your parents end up in the wrong home as they age, you end up having to help them more. And the systems that can support them can't help them as well as they might be able to if they were in a low maintenance house with single level and easy to access bathrooms and all the things we think about. But people don't really want to have that home until they need it. So there's a couple of phases people often go through in their home, and that might be lifestyle houses, and then they might think about low maintenance housing. They might think about aging, somewhere they can age in place somewhere in there. And the number of times they turn a house over, as everybody here knows, is the number of times they part with $100,000 in stamp duties and real estate agents' commissions and tax and all the other costs of moving house that are painful. And if you don't have a lot of money, making those decisions at the right time of life, rather than making them and then regretting them and then having to unpick them, I think is really important discussion for our parents to have earlier. My dad says he moved out of his city house to the beachside place they live now at 70 and got rid of a lot of stuff at that point of his life. And he says he would not like to be doing that older. No. And then you've got the people who rent, who, if they haven't got housing certainty as they're coming into this phase, they then have to move every 2 years or all their life. Like, how absolutely gut-wrenching is that for our renting community? And really, as their children, you're going to have to help them navigate those journeys as their bodies can't do all the heavy lifting. And well, maybe you won't. Maybe they'll just have to pay removalists. But I think, the beautiful values in my world say you help your parents through the aging phases of their life, like they helped you through the youth phases of yours, right? And so I want to make sure my parents are in a place where they are going to be happy and able to age in place at the later stages and before they lose a partner as well. Because if you lose a partner and you're in the big house in the city, you then have to pack that house up on your own. You have to say goodbye to 25 or 50 years of memories. The most beautiful story I've heard is of a friend's parents who, I think the dad knows he'll pass before his wife unless something goes wrong. And he's moved the whole family from the inner city Sydney house up to the Gold Coast near his daughter. He's moved him and his partner. They've sold the big Sydney house, got rid of all the old memories and tucked them away and built the photo albums rather than kept all the drawings and all the things parents do. And he's made sure that they've set up a new life in the Gold Coast together so that if he does pass earlier, she's actually in a place where she's safe, she's happy, the daughter's down the road, the grandchildren are nearby, the community's built around her already. She's not trying to do that all on her own. And we forget the value and importance of community. It is so important to retirement, right? We leave the workforce, we leave behind all these relationships And often those relationships go on in the workforce, standing around the water cooler, having the fun. And we leave all that. And the feeling of isolation can be phenomenal for people. And they may not want to admit that.
I think that's one of the important reasons that I see talking to my parents about retirement and what that looks like for them, even though they don't want to use the word, because that gives them a lot more autonomy and control about what they do next. Because with my grandmother, she did not want to talk about it at all until she had to be moved into aged care because she didn't have capacity anymore. And that meant that she wasn't getting to actively choose because she just wouldn't talk about it. And so I see it as even just the kindest thing, encouraging my parents to talk about retirement and what that looks like for them, because then I know their wishes and I know what they want to do and which direction they want to go in, and I can help where they need it.
You've actually got to hope they're talking to each other about it. But a lot of the time I find, because I run a 6-week course for people who are planning for retirement, and a lot of the time the people come in and they say, oh, thank you. We sat down with your workbook and with this week's course material, and it got us talking to each other about these things, because we'd never even talked about these things together, about what he wanted and what I wanted and what life looked like. And, marriage at that point of life, if you've been together for 30 or 40 years, it becomes a bit of a rhythm, right? And you need a bit of a shake-up sometimes to get talking and even creating those visions of the next phase of life, because we have there's something called socio-emotional psychology theory. I think it's called there's something called socio-emotional selectivity theory. And that says that once you can see the end of your life in your hypothetical vision, you stop making plans and you start doing emotional things. You stop having goals. And in fact, if we think our life expectancy, if we don't think about that long life expectancy, we might stop making plans and goals at 55 or 60, because our brains are inherently quite ageist. You look at a 55-year-old today, they tell themselves they're too old to learn something new. You want to shake them. You go, you are not too old to learn something new. Now let's go learn something new, because your life is going to get really boring at 65 if you haven't learned something new, right? But this is the reality of my generation, is they are living with a picture of life that's shorter than it's going to be. We got 15 to 25 years of life expectancy in my lifetime. Right? We got to stick it in the middle of our lives and have an epic retirement, right? It wasn't available to my grandparents. They lived long, but they lived in poor health for 20 years, my grandparents. And in fact, and their life expectancies were a lot shorter. So they stopped living much earlier in their behaviours. And they also didn't have the money. They were afraid that their money would run out, because all they had to rely on was their income, and if they were eligible, an age pension.
So Beck, we've heard a lot about how to talk to our parents about having an epic retirement. If people go away from this conversation, what one thing do you want them to do?
I think, and the fun part is, if you can't have the conversation, just give them a book, right? Because it'll open a conversation, and they can just laugh about the fact that, oh, you think I'm ready for the R word.
Just right? Leave it on the bedside table.
Yeah, you can get one at Big W. But Christmas is coming up, right? Yeah. But the reality of it is, have a chat with them about what they really want to do that's epic. And I think the cool part that young people can relate to older people on is the concept of epic. None of us want to live an ordinary existence, right? And epic makes retirement cool. Retirement isn't cool. Right? But epic makes it cool. And that's one of the reasons I use it to open Pandora's box, is because no one wants a retirement, but everyone wants an epic retirement.
Yeah.
And, that allows you to have a conversation about longer lives, affording, what can you afford to do? Living within your means, having a good life though. What are the choices that don't cost a lot, right? How do you get more for your money? All these things, because not everybody has heaps of money. And if they do have enough money, then how are you going to get out there and use it, right? Because we do have to egg the people with money not to leave it to their children as the primary objective of life. I know that might offend some people, but our goal should be to enjoy our lives, all of us, every generation. And legacy is a good fortune at the end if there's some left, right? But I want people to understand, and I think generationally the Gen Xers will understand it more, that superannuation is actually what you're meant to fund your good retirement with.
Yeah, I think that's a really great message to leave things with, because making retirement exciting again, it doesn't have to be boring. It doesn't have to mean the end of things. It could actually mean trying lots of new hobbies and going after new projects and traveling all over the world.
And a portfolio life that maybe doesn't even have work in it. Imagine that.
Wow. That'd be quite nice, wouldn't it? Well, Beck, I will certainly be passing your book on to my parents, so I'll see what they have to say about it. But thank you so much for joining me on the show today, and I'll put links so people can check out your book, also in Big W, your course, your podcast, in the show notes.
Thanks so much, Kate.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks for watching this video on the Rask Network. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get videos each and every day on business, finance, investing, and so much more.